All right, buddy, coming at you here on a Friday. Want to make sure Nets Nation does not think the sky is falling. Hit us with the beats today.
You better believe it, man. As the hand hovers over the panic button for the Brooklyn Nets fan base, we're happy to be telling everybody that you're making us your first listen where we're free for everyone because by listening here, you're going to get the scoop on the adjustments that James Harden can make to his game and the ripple effect that it has throughout this roster. You do not play at such a level that James Harden has for his entire career only to be foiled by an adjustment from referees. It's not going to be that big of a deal. You just have to show a little bit of patience. And quite frankly, we've got the numbers to back it up.
Oh, buddy, we get into all of it here. Feeling really good after this one. Making sure, doing a little kind of head a checkup from the neck up here to make sure we're not overreacting to the season. A lot of good stuff to take away from these first 5 games, even though it's not that easy to see sometimes on paper. We're going to get into it all. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single gosh darn day of the week. I threw myself off. Every time I do a different opening, I'm just like, I get the yips. You know how it goes.
Play the
I'm Doug
hits.
Norrie. Yeah, I wish I played this. I'm Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR.com. Give me a follow over at Doug Norrie, blue check verified. Can't say the same for my co-host, one Mr. Adam Armbrecht. Still waiting for that blue Twitter check. It's an absolute embarrassment, but here on the show anyway. Buddy, how are we doing here Friday? Coming off a Nets loss. Think we got a ways to kind of spin this a little more positive today.
I'm just the guy in the club getting eyeballed by the bouncer. Everyone's asking questions. What's he doing here? We all get it. He's underdressed. What are those, flip-flops? Knock it off. Get this guy out of here right now. We're doing good, man. Cause for, as we said all season long, there's nothing in this early sample size, even coming off a bad loss to Miami. You highlighted the point differential from last year to this year. It's a lot of negative trends right now for the Brooklyn Nets, but I feel buoyed coming into a Friday as we intend to highlight the reasons why none of this stuff is something that you need to look at and label as long-term concerns.
Yeah, or we could just do like nihilist, like the world's going to end anyway, so let's just enjoy basketball while we have it. There's like a couple ways you can take
Should I
a
start
season.
burning stuff? You know what I mean? It's like burn jersey territory where I just start lighting things on fire.
We could be like nihilist net fans. That'd be a fun account. Okay, so we got a couple. You saw maybe in the title here reasons that I don't think we should panic. We probably spent some time checking in with folks around the NBA, the net space, and just sort of getting a general feel for the landscape right now. Nets are 2-3. It's not looked great, and we spent a decent amount of time talking about some of the things that we thought kind of were going wrong here, talking about it, tweeting about it, like whatever. There's a bunch of stuff. Look, you can hang a hat on the old post of things that are going wrong, but there's also plenty of things that I think, and our Adam and I both think, are correctable and reasons to not really maybe read all that much into what's going on here to start the season, right? And so
100%.
I think we can start. Let's start with James Harden, because James Harden is a guy that we've talked about a ton about why it has not looked great, and we have lots of reasons for it. And we're not going to go back and rehash all this. Go back and listen to multiple episodes from earlier in the week where we go through a bunch of different reasons why things aren't perfect. But in looking at some of the numbers and just actually replaying some of the stuff from the games today, I think there's also reasons to think that some of the problems the Nets are having, especially around Harden, are correctable, and that it's actually not all that bad. Like there's parts that aren't that good, but there's plenty of actually positives that sometimes it's a little difficult to see through the noise of the stuff that's very easy to see, which is like them losing games and his burst maybe not being there. But I think we both agree, right, that there's stuff in here that's very correctable, even maybe even short-term correctable for Harden.
Yeah, first thing right off the bat, the theme of this season is referees adjusting the foul calls. You're not going to get some of those, as you and I have been labeling, like non-basketball moves
Yep.
to try to get fouls. And there's some great examples of this that have been getting covered the last few days, not just with Harden, but some other high-profile players around the league that says once James Harden stops performing the acts that he's been used to getting whistles on, then he'll be finishing these plays. And a lot of those plays, as you're going to talk about here, are ones where he's actually beaten the defender. He's already accomplished the hardest part of the task, which is getting
Yep.
past the defense. Now it's just about following through and finishing off those shots. And most of them we'd like to think are going to be going in.
Yeah, so like there's plenty of examples. We were watching the game last night. We saw them in real time. There's been some really good accounts out there that have done a good job of sort of curating some of the content here around some of the hard and histrionics of trying to get fouled. Stuff that for years and years and years of him with him have worked, right? It's like, and I think most people would agree that removing the part where you invite fouls is a good thing for the overall game of basketball. I think
Yep.
that really nearly any, like, if you wouldn't do it in an open gym, you shouldn't do it on the basketball court. I think like that's the kind of general rule I think most of us can live by. If you'd be too embarrassed to do this thing when you were playing with your buddies, you probably shouldn't do it on the court. And I get the reasons why. So Nate Duncan for Hollinger and Duncan podcast and Dunked On podcast, one of the best minds out there for when it comes to just breaking down basketball, had a really good just kind of tweet thread, not only about Harden, about some of the guys that have gotten into this, have built some of their game around it. And he had three plays for Harden that were so clearly him operating in this old world of basketball, which was these all would have been fouls,
Yep.
which is bad. And none of them got called. They were all brutal looking misses. Like they were like one literally just floated out of bounds. We threw his hands up and the ball just landed out of bounds. And then Miami got it and went the other way. Another one, he just basically threw one off the backboard. And I actually forget the third one, but
Out near the
in
top of
each
the
of
key, I think, with Butler on him, where it's like it looks like he's got it wrapped
yes,
up and he just kind of swings around and throws one out into the ether and is like, "Come
and they
on!"
look brutal. They look brutal. And if you watch Harden for years, these all would have been fouls. They all would
Yeah,
have been called fouls. And Harden is like operating in this mindset of where they all would have been called fouls. And now they're just not fouls. Sort of like overnight, they're not fouls anymore. And so the good part is in each one of these examples, he just completely dusted the defender.
right.
Like, and there are three good defenders. One was Lowry, just goes right by him. Another's Bam, an absolutely elite defender, but blows by him. And the third one's Butler, who feels the need to like get over physical with him, and actually probably had him beat too. Harden has beat all three of these guys. He
Yeah.
just has in his mind that he has to then do the next thing, which is not shoot, which is go to the line, because it's it's easier to go to the line and you get the better percentage there. You're gonna hit like 90% of your free. The point expectation for James Harden going to the line is better than James Harden taking like any shot. That's
Right.
just a math thing, right? So he's just too smart to continue going like this, right? Like
Well
give this
regarded
like
as one of the high basketball IQ players.
yes. It's actually his basketball IQ that is so high that has him in this spot to begin with.
Right.
He was already so smart to say it is better for me to get fouled. It's better to me,
Right.
like if I can shoot 80+% at the line, it's better than any shot I can take on the court, right?
Yep.
Like my my point expectation around that shot is better than basically standing anywhere except for maybe a wide open 3-pointer. And
Mhm.
actually that might not, that it might still be better than that. Do you think James Harden is going to spend the whole year hunting fouls like this when he realizes it doesn't work? There's no chance. There's no chance. He's just too smart. It might take 7-10 games to get it fully out of his system. But if you want to say if you stood on the back of Harden is a smart player and you've always thought this about him, and you should, because if you ever watched him play, he's a guy that completely shifted his game literally overnight, coming from
Yeah.
Houston to the Nets. Like literally overnight, he became a high volume shooter to a high volume assist guy.
Yeah.
Like in the span of one game.
And literally was like, "That's fine. MBD guys, what's next?"
Like he changed his laundry and he became an assist guy. He's going to figure this. He's going to figure this out. There's just no possible way. And it looks terrible when you watch the tape because it's like sort of embarrassingly bad how bad like these kind of inviting fouls looks. And I just know it. I know it. I'll bet a huge amount of money on this. This will just decrease significantly with every game. That it will be like a non-thing pretty soon. Like I'm so confident of it.
Oh, 100%. So I know, and we knew this was going to probably be a little bit of a bleed over conversation. So That's the first step, I think, right? This adjustment to the way games are being called. A quick footnote on it before we get into some other percentages from this year relative to last year for James Harden. I do think it's like what the NFL does when they do rule changes. You get these preseason games and they've cut down there as well, but they even have the scrimmage practices where there's referees there and they go, "Hey, we're going to call that pass interference now. Hey, we're going to call that hold now." So all these players get these reps for an entire off season of like, okay, this is the new order here when it comes to the league. The NBA doesn't really offer that up, and it's funny when you say 7 to 10 games. How long might it take for James Harden, for Chris Paul, who's also been subject to some of that video coverage on hunting for those fouls? Like, how long will it
Oh
take
yeah.
them? And by the way, Harden also wasn't healthy this offseason, but if you had gotten more reps of this in scrimmage sessions, then I think you would have seen any of these players across the league go, okay, I understand where I need to go with this, and I'm going to get there a lot quicker than a lot of them saying, when you see it on paper, we're going to call, we're going to be a little bit more, focused on these calls. Okay, we'll see. I'm still James Harden. I'm still Chris Paul. I still get these calls. You mean for everybody else in the league, not for me. And now you're getting that real taste of it in real time.
Yeah, and of course it would happen a little more against a really really physical team like Miami. Like
Right.
this is easily the most physical team they faced yet. Those all three of those guys we mentioned before are among the most physical, high IQ basketball players in the league. Right,
Mhm.
like Lowry, Bam, Jimmy, like those guys are as smart as it gets, as physical as it gets. That's why they're just proven winners, and they're going to steal. They're going to like just kind of chip away your edges physically also. So if you're already thinking there's going to be a lot of physicality going in, which I'm sure Harden assumes, then you're going to assume that those things are going to work even more because that physicality is going to be there. And all
Right.
of a sudden the physicality is there or not sometimes, and it just doesn't work anymore. So I in watching that, I get why it was like sort of easy to have a laugh at it. And Nate Duncan was kind of doing that, and he's awesome. So I totally get it. And I get why he's doing a victory lap on this now, and he should be because he's been screaming about this being bad for years. And so if I was him, I would do the same victory lap.
Right.
But at the same time, I think you can also look at it with a slightly different lens and say, right, this is going to be so easy to fix.
Yeah.
Like this is so easy for a guy like Harden to fix this that it will just not be something we'll be talking about in 2 weeks. I'm like almost positive.
And this, by the way, this isn't a college player going to the pros and saying, can he adjust his game from college coming into the NBA now? It looks different. It's not going to be as effective. You're undersized. You're undermuscled. This is a seasoned veteran who has all the experience in the world in these areas. And again, has also already showcased, I can adjust. I'm malleable in terms of the way that I use my skills. It's just a matter of understanding what the parameter is going to be.
All right, we're going to get into some more reasons not to panic here with the Brooklyn Nets. First, you got to know that this episode of Locked On Nets is brought to you by McDonald's. I think you heard of McDonald's before. They've been proudly serving communities since 1965. That's decades, folks. Always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's a place where you can connect. Kind of underrated stuff like a free Wi-Fi for everybody there. The coffee. I've always been a long proponent of the coffee. Completely underrated. Stopping McDonald's on a road trip is always the way to go for a quick bite. You know you're going to get something get something that the whole family can enjoy. Maybe if you go to a birthday party or two there in your lifetime. Also, everyone, you know McDonald's at this point, folks. A big thank you to our friends at McDonald's for always being there. I'm loving it.
So the other piece then here is step one is adjusting to the way the game is getting called. And now to me, what we've been talking about is like, what's the trickle down effect of James Harden making the adjustments? And the one thing that you go back and you look at is what is his shooting percentage now, and where is the breakdown of his shot selection? So on this current season, he's down nearly 15 about 14, 14% or so from the field overall, only shooting 35%, from the field this season. 28 of 78 from the field, but 13 of 39 from beyond the arc. 50% of his shots are coming from beyond the arc as opposed to just last season. So you think about it in terms of his new role with the Nets, 44% of his shots coming from the outside. It makes sense to me that right now, because he's still looking for the fouls, he's not getting the calls, the percentages aren't there, he's not hitting some of the floaters, that he starts to lean into this other area of his game. But I'll make the case that once he's adjusted to the way things get called and he starts finishing more looks at the basket, the reward is there of converting, and you'll see him start to balance out these percentages of inside versus outside shooting. Because while I'll take the 3 pointers from James Harden, I don't think that's not the best part of his game. And it's not the most important part of his game for relative team success overall. It's far more important that he succeeds going to the basket and in the paint than it is hitting these perimeter shots.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that you can get into a default mode for him. And look, we're going to talk about more than just Harden here for
Yeah.
sure. But there's just like, but he's look, you have to talk about it because one, the on ball time, like the amount of gravity that he has, like it becomes important to kind of talk about this stuff. I totally agree with you that I think that this will have cascading effects as he becomes more comfortable in the sort of new world order of basketball, which by the way, everyone deals with. Like everyone's doing it. Everyone has to do the same thing. Some people have just relied on it more than others in the past. He's one of them. As this begins to trickle back down into cascade back down to the rest of the game. Yes, I agree with you. You will see changes in how the shots are being distributed. Because I think he'll just those videos. I'll put the link in the show notes. If you watch these videos, you'll see there's just like the parts where he's beaten the defender twice pretty easily. There's just no way he'll keep doing this. He'll start finishing the basket. I'm just sure, and they might not go in, but at least like they'll give himself an opportunity.
And by the way, as he starts to play through that and make those, now the double down is now the defenders will actually start, really committing fouls by this season's NBA standards. Now you will get fouled more and you will get to the line more, but you have to show the defense that you'll play through that little contact and finish so that they'll start hitting you a little bit harder. And listen, you're going to have to pay that price of the physicality, but you will get to the line more, another area where we've talked about he hasn't gotten there often enough either.
And also, and one thing to know, just for all you folks out there that like we've been looking at a lot of numbers here, a lot of on-off court stuff. We'll get into a little bit more about some of the role players too. We talked about some about it yesterday also, but one thing to know is that actually when you separate Harden and Durant this season, they're on-off court. Like so when Harden is on the court without Durant and then vice versa, when Durant is on the court without Harden, the Nets have won all of those minutes. Like the net rating on those lineups is actually good. Like Harden has won it. Harden has actually won his Harden only line. I'm calling him Harden only because it's like not Durant, and he's not the only player out there. But the Nets have won the Harden only minutes this season.
Yeah,
and they've won the Durant only minutes. They just weirdly not won the Durant and Harden minutes, which
the automatic minutes that you think you always win those minutes are the ones they're not.
This is why the Nets fans should actually be really encouraged. Because do you think they will go a whole season of losing a net of Durant and James Harden together playing losing basketball? There's just no way. There's no chance. There's no chance. No chance. And so basketball is actually really predictable in some ways in that like you don't know who's going to win the championship every year, but if you give me 82 games and I have James Harden and Kevin Durant on the court for some percentage of those 82 games, give me 82 games. You take the negative side, I'll take the positive side, and I'll put any amount of money on it. Like, right. We'll just settle up at the end of the year because there's just no way. So if you think that they're going to be a negative together the whole season, you don't know I don't know what to tell you. Like, go listen to another podcast. It doesn't make any sense.
Doug. Keep listening to our podcast.
Turn it off, delete it. Now's a good time to remind you to say thanks for making Locked On Nets your first listen too.
Hashtag don't first listen. Really appreciate it. We're free on all the platforms. but as I think we start to transition this conversation now, because first of all, yes, you're 100% right. This is like saying, do you think that LeBron James and AD would trend negative all season long with their minutes? No, it's not going to be the case. There's all of these samples across the league where the quality of the players, it's impossible for this to be the result over an entire season. And from all these things that we mentioned, it's also probably impossible when you have Kevin Durant, you have James Harden, for a lot of the role players around them to have some of the negative returns that we've seen so far early on in this season. There's been some easy ones like we've talked about with Joe Harris. He struggled early in the year. Now he has a nice game, sets that record. Okay, maybe he's starting to turn the corner. And then there's still that other element of where do all these pieces fit? But now I think the secondary part is the other thing that people have harped on is what is Steve Nash doing with rotations? Why didn't you automatically start Bruce Brown from day one? I think he's trying to figure out all the pieces that fit together. How do you massage James Harden and Kevin Durant together and away from one another to benefit? And there's some interesting pieces here. When we talked pre-show, I want to say, well, what's your best starting lineup? And then what's the best rotation? When you gave your starting five, I was like, I guess that's kind of the obvious one. But then it's the pieces in behind it, and how do you utilize the Millsaps, even Bruce Brown, no matter where you start him, any of these guys, Blake Griffin, LMA. How do you use all of them and try to create balanced lineups that give you offense and defensive opportunities, as opposed to going, we're going to bang our head as hard as we can offensively for the first 7-8 minutes of a quarter. Then we're going to go pure defense. And you just don't get a rhythm or a flow, I think. And that's probably one of the things that Nash is taking away early in this season. It's hard to just throw out the one iteration of a lineup. Again, big asterisk when you don't have the third wheel here of Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, so I mean, the lineup that I threw out there to Adam, as I think, and maybe we both agree at this point of what you should start going forward would be Harden, Durant, Harris, and then do what they did for kind of the better part of last year near the end, which was Blake Griffin and Bruce Brown. Like that lineup was the starting five that I had. Maybe do you disagree with that? I mean, I'm just saying it there because you mentioned the lineup and then we didn't say which one it was. But
no, that was yours. I actually, so there's some numbers that we'll get into here. I actually would go. I would make a switch out of that lineup. I agree with you on Bruce Brown. I don't think that Blake Griffin is necessarily the guy that you want to have in the starting five.
Okay, well, who would you play? Who would you play instead of him?
Aldridge. I think that now we've talked about this, right? Blake, Millsap, Aldridge, all these guys kind of fall into the category of none of them are going for 35 minutes a game. But I think there's very defined skill sets inside of Aldridge's game that are pretty consistent that you can rely on for a starting five to say, okay, this is what we have with these five players, and then what gets produced off of that. So I think it plays into Harden and the areas of his game that would benefit off of this, even though it takes away from, say, the lob opportunities. That's not going to be in Aldridge's game, but I think it does create a bit more balance. And then as we get into some of like the Raptor ratings, the net ratings, there's another actual subgroup that I know you won't agree with, but I'm very curious to get your take on it as well. But I would go Aldridge in the starting five going forward.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't do that only because I'm just gonna look this up real quick to see if my eyes are correct. But it feels like to me the Aldridge and Harden pairing isn't. Oh, it's been really good. Okay, I take it back. Yeah, that it's 40 minutes. That's been really good. It's like offensive. This is per PvP stats, which is an amazing website if you haven't gone there. But they are plus 17 and they're 40 minutes together, which is, and this doesn't bring out everybody else in the lineup. So there's like a little noise, although this is like pretty definitive. It's like a 114.63 offensive rating and a pretty amazing 97.59 defensive rating. So, my eye test would have said that like it didn't, like Aldridge didn't have sort of like the necessary athleticism to play as a big with Harden. But if numbers are going to tell you differently, then I'm happy to change my tune on that one. It's interesting. Yeah, I wonder. I think do we agree on Bruce Brown being in the starting lineup? Like,
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's really nice impacts that he makes again for everybody else based on his skill set as well. That's why it's not even about like himself and his production. It's the benefit that he provides for everybody else.
All right, let's get into a little bit more of this because I think there's like a couple other ways we can slice this. First, talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar, best protein bar on the market. Point, stop, other places, companies, whatever you would call them at this point, have tried to either reproduce or came up with something before. It just doesn't even come close to matching what you're getting with Built Bar. They started with the flavors, they covered it in chocolate, and they somehow made it healthy. All the numbers line up here, folks. The flavor: salted caramel, strawberry, cookies and cream, German chocolate, coconut, just some of the sampling you're going to get with Built Bar. And then you want to head into the analytics, slice and dice along the stats: 17 to 18 grams of protein, 130 calories. That's a sweet spot. 4 to 5 grams of sugar, not too much. 4 to 5 grams of net carbs. Now we're cooking. Built Bar was the official bar of the U.S. track and field team. I think they know a little something about athleticism. Go to built.com, use the promo code Locked On. You're going to get 15% off your order. You have to use the promo code Locked On for 15% off at built.com.
And of course, our friends over at betonline.ag, just like Randy Quaid and Independence Day, they want you to know that we're back and we're better than ever. That's because they have a new website interface as the start of the basketball season, well underway here. 5 games. Come on, we're almost down the road here. They got more props, odds, and lines than ever before. They remain, of course, your number one spot for all the basketball and football action, both NFL and at the collegiate level. You head over to that new updated website on your desktop or that little mobile device we call a cell phone, and you can sign up today and receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. You join using the promo code Locked On, and you'll get that 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. From basketball, football, baseball, postseason action, World Series, 2 games in, all tied up, NHL, boxing, UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. So now that we know I'm a genius, we can kind of get into some of the details on it and prove me even more correct. There's a lot of numbers that we get into here. One of the ones that I've referenced it last season. I like Raptor rating just to get kind of a sense where guys are in terms of offense and defensive game. I'll get into why I think Aldridge works well with Harden and benefits the starting five. But when you go over by Raptor rating, here's another interesting thing you might not realize. Aldridge is the only player on the Brooklyn Nets right now with a both positive offensive and defensive Raptor rating. Even Kevin Durant, who's the highest at +6.5 on the offensive end, is a slight negative on the defensive side of the ball. So you're now talking about Aldridge in that 5 spot. And if you're thinking relative to, Millsap's obviously further down this pecking order right now, but relative to, say, a Blake Griffin, at least in the early going this year, Blake has been an absolute disaster on the offensive end. When we're talking about the adjustment of James Harden, figuring out this new game, it's more important to find a way to almost help him get to the areas of his game that he needs to get into more. So if you have LaMarcus Aldridge on the court, and we saw the bad sample size with Nick Claxton early on, those lob attempts, looking for those floaters, not working. That's not the game you're going to work with Aldridge. But what you do get out of Aldridge is the opportunity for James Harden to drive. And if he gets to that place where maybe that foul is going to come that he wants to flail on, the difference is now you're putting a man at the 5 who can hit the elbow jumper. So while you may say, yeah, kick it to the outside, look for Joe Harris in the corner, try to swing the ball around the perimeter, you're only talking about having to use your court vision and put a little drop-off bounce pass to a guy within 3 feet of you as presumably 2 defenders collapse on you as you head towards the rim. Once Aldridge hits down those elbow jumpers, now all of a sudden the defense extends out a little bit and it opens up those opportunities for Harden to finish at the rim. So I just think that he creates Aldridge, that is, a far more balanced offense and defensive unit. He's not the same player as any of these other guys defensively, and yet he still is big enough. He can still stay in front of players, and he's a traditional anchor in the paint kind of big with marginally more athleticism and range than, say, DeAndre Jordan from last year.
Yeah, Aldridge has been good. We talked about this a few
Yeah.
podcasts ago, that he was it was him and Patty Mills that they had won basically all those minutes completely because, before last game, Mills had made every 3-pointer, and Aldridge has just been absolutely automatic in the mid range, like completely
Yes.
automatic. Something like I had this number before, it's 596. This doesn't, yeah, he's like shooting like 70% in the mid range or something like that. And that's
figure.
like, foul line extended basically, like that basically the zone that you can just picture Marcus Aldridge standing there, planting roots in, and then just draining a bucket that looked like it was so easy. It's great. And I think you're right. It does keep sort of traditional defenders a little bit honest because, one, he's so tall and his release is so high that's very difficult to defend that shot, even if you are kind of up on him. And so he has no lift, but he doesn't really need it because of how extended he gets. And he's made every single one of them. And so that's going to help you. That's going to help you on the offense. And it's not like this isn't a new thing. We knew that Aldridge could do this. This isn't just like he's running hot from never having done it before. This is actually his skill. The game weirdly sort of passed him by because people stopped doing this, right? When the game became so reliant on 3-pointers, he, only moderately made that adjustment. But for a long time, this guy was a max player on like the post and mid-range game because he just hit everything. And if he's got, and we've seen in the Nets offense that there is a place for that because they can floor space really well. And if you can actually do that effectively, like no one complains about Kevin Durant mid-range shots because it's like, oh, it's Kevin Durant. He gets to a spot and he makes them. I'm not comparing their games, but
Nobody complained about Kyrie last year, who also likes, we joked about that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are 2 guys that still love the art of the mid-range. And it's great because they play at a high level and they shoot that at a high percentage. So while you always say 3's worth more than 2, sure, but not if you can hit these with this level of consistency. And that's what Aldridge does, even if, as you say, the game's gone away from the post play. But this is still very valuable here. And when you had said the 5-man lineup, speaking to Bruce Brown, he shot the 3 ball a little bit better early in the season. So now in that 5-man lineup, you're talking about having Joe Harris and having Bruce Brown out on the perimeter, Harden on ball, going into the paint. You have Durant just lurking out there. And now Aldridge can lean back. The spacing is so wide open now where you legitimately have 4 other threats to knock down a shot.
Yeah, I'm for it. I think he's there's probably a limit to how many minutes he can actually play just because of his age. You don't want to he can't go out there and play 27 minutes a game. I don't think you want to ask him to do that at this point. And so where you get him in the lineup, I think kind of his game's sort of like at times personnel independent because of the reasons we just said, at least on the offensive end, because
Mhm.
he's just going to live in the zones that he lives, and it's actually not a place that a lot of other players live. So you're rarely congesting any single part of the offense based on where everyone else kind of wants to go, which I think weirdly enough does work with this team.
Yep.
And so I don't think you're going to get crazy minutes out of him, but do they try him in the starting lineup? It makes sense to do it now, probably. And so it makes sense to at least begin the experiment. And if you think that like that's another way that you can kind of over offense for the what you're going to lose on defense, because you will lose on defense here. Like there's
Yep.
it's that is going to be a pretty compromised defensive unit. It's okay if you can get a lot of offense out of it. And there's a world where you can with that. So yeah, I'd like to see it. I'd be interested to make the change.
Now, it leads me to another interesting take and a far more outside the box one, I would like to say. There's one piece here that I was looking at. Net combined rating with Aldrich and Brown on the court together is very positive. There's actually an interesting, very small 5-minute sample size where you incorporate Millsap. So, just thinking about how do you get some of these guys that haven't looked so good early on in the season and try to improve that. But here would be my caveat off of that. So again, when you talk, I'll use the Raptor rating just as the frame of reference. Nicholas Claxton, who's by far the worst offensive rated player on the Brooklyn Nets right now, only slightly behind Javon Carter, mind you, but
Pass the eye test on that, by the way. Like
he's
that one.
that's pudding proof right there, as they like to say.
Yeah.
There's not a lot to try to surmise out of it. But his defensive rating on the team right now is third behind only Bruce Brown and LaMarcus Aldridge. So this does flex in then to my next thinking and curiosity that I want to get your thoughts on, which was, do you ever now can you get to a place where as maybe Bruce comes off the court and Patty Mills, now you think about incorporating a lineup that involves in it. I'm not married to every piece of this, but Kevin Durant, uh, Aldrich, and a little bit of Nicholas Claxton, because now what you give yourself is on the offensive end. Aldrich can occupy that space out just inside the arc. He's going to keep some of the defenders honest. If Harden wants to work, or Patty Mills, anybody wants to work the two-man game going to the basket with Nicholas Claxton, a lot more space for Claxton to operate in there. And the biggest benefit to me would be then on the defensive end, where we've often talked about the problem with Claxton defensively at times is his value is in the switchability, can play all 5 positions, but he's not the biggest. He doesn't have the beef or the muscle. Even though Aldrich isn't the most athletic, he is bigger. So take the 76ers game, for example. If you could put Aldrich on Embiid and live with the results there, on the defensive end, now all of a sudden you get Claxton out into a spot where he can be on Tobias Harris or switch if you need to. And guess who ends up on Harris now? It ends up being Kevin Durant. Like, this is probably not something you use a ton of, but I do think there are going to be matchup dependent situations where you get some really nice length and size on both ends of the floor, and it ends up putting Kevin Durant in plus matchups on both ends of the floor consistently.
Yeah, I mean, you have to like whenever you play Claxton, there has to be like a lot of offensive firepower on it because you're getting so little from him on offense right now. His game's just not developed. I
And by
think
the
they
way,
clearly
do Patty Mills and Joe Harris to finish out that 5-man.
yeah, because you need floor spacing.
Yep.
I think it's Aldridge and not, by the way, just for the sake of mentioning it, Aldridge and Claxton have not played any minutes together this season. So
No, we haven't
there's
seen it yet.
yeah, there's exactly 0 minutes. Now, I do think that they've continued to just throw out these different things. So if you like if Nash was willing to do that 5-man lineup that we saw yesterday, which we called the no offensive lineup, like
Yep.
there's no reason to not try everything in this case because again, guys like Durant and Harden give you so much latitude on what you can try that it's worth it to keep doing it. I don't think we'll do it because I think there's probably still a little bit weirdness around. It's probably just not enough spacing with those two
Mhm.
guys, but I think that the Nets are clearly still incentivized to get Claxton out there because they do probably recognize, well, one, they just need to figure it out for next season. Like they need to figure out now if he's part of the long-term plan or not. So that alone is enough to give him minutes and just say, hey, it's either yes or a no.
Yep.
It could be a no. Like, oh, we don't really know. So I think we will continue to see a decent amount of minutes from him as they try to make that determination. And if you're going to do that, you might as well try it with everything. We saw him and Blake paired together. We didn't think that would work, by the way. Narrator, it didn't. But the like in terms of if you're going to try different things, if you already were willing to try that, you shouldn't be precluded from trying anything else. So
Exactly.
I think I'm with it on that standpoint. I don't think we're going to see a lot of it, but again, I didn't think we'd see some of these other combinations, and we have. So I've been wrong. I've definitely been wrong about that part of it so far.
Yeah, and I think this ties into, again, what we've seen from Millsap so far, and if we're in love with where we think the state of his game is. If Blake Griffin is maybe struggling in certain areas, you need to just start to think about how do you shuffle this hierarchy. And honestly, this is a conversation that we can keep going into the next, the first 15, 20 games of the season, because there's a lot of other combinations that we're not even going to touch on here. It's how do you maximize the value of, like, joke intended, how do you maximize the value of what Bembry is? Because clearly inside of this version of the Nets without Kyrie Irving, there might be functionality for him. How do you figure out how to maximize Blake Griffin and Paul Millsap to make sure that you're creating value for them? Javon Carter is probably the black sheep of this group because it doesn't look like he's effective on either end of the floor particularly. But even that in of itself is a statement of, so now how do we solve a lack of minutes out of this backcourt that we need to fill in already in the absence of Kyrie? So there's going to be a lot of things to flesh out, and hopefully some things get proven right here as we move along. And then the more sample sizes we get is the more defined you can kind of say, this looks like the best function of this role. But like we said at the top, the first function is Harden adjusting, which he will, Harden figuring out this new game, which he will, and then really seeing how everything plays off of that.
Yeah. So, and again, the theme of the show is we don't need to panic. There's been plenty of good stuff to take from this season. There's plenty of stuff that's very correctable. I think we're going to continue to see it as the Nets get into the season and get more minutes under their belt. So if you were on the Chicken Little Skies Falling train, I think you can, let's all take one little step back into the station here for a second, and we're going to be okay. A lot of different metaphors there. All right. We're going to get out of here. The Nets Nets play Pacers. We might come to you something over the weekend or post game. Not sure about that right now. Pacers Friday night. Hopefully Nets get back into the W column. In the meantime, make sure you go over to YouTube. The link will be in the show notes that you're subscribing to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. We're loving the comments we're getting over there. The numbers are continuing to climb up. We're really excited about doing. We're going to be with YouTube all year long. So make sure you like and subscribe over on YouTube to get every episode over there.
Go spin circles for me, wound relentlessly around the words we used to sling. Oh, such torturous things. Why, that, my friends, is Brendan Urie, Panic at the Disco.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again Monday talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.